Group 2 would like to.
So to make sure it's, I mean no disrespect, but just to make sure it's sufficiently visible, post it for a minute. And we edit that as
Alright, so these are like philosophies of development, and so we have a school here for education. We have money and housing being built for economic development. Businesses. We have health, we have food, we have energy, we have water. And then the idea being that most peaceful needs will be sustainable, so we have us here, then goes down towards the actual communities continuing it after we leave. And that's the kind of philosophy we came up with. So it's not just us coming in and doing it, but making it more sustainable so that it keeps going after we leave.
Does anyone from the group want to add anything? Does anyone have any questions for the group? Can I ask a question then? How did it go within the group? Was the poet's vision of development smooth, easy, or were there some frustrations?
I would say some frustrations. We have one person who was.
They were yelling at me.
We were all talking at the same time.
Okay.
Well, it's also hard to put an idea into a picture that can be translated to somebody else without being completely wrong.
Good use of wrong. Don't worry about that kind of thing. That's completely normal and natural. And we're talking about it on 2 levels. One, it's your first foray into Peace Corps group work style. But 2, we'll build towards it. Hold that thought for a second. Any other group care to present their vision?
You're staring at me. You want me to talk?
You were staring at me. I'm pointing to the camera.
Okay, so we have the little poem thing. So we kind of made up like 8 poems or something. But we have B is for diversity, E is for education or equality, values. So B is for values or volunteerism, E is for the environment, L is for language or land utilization, O is for opportunity, P is for peace or proactive, N is for MDGs, which are Millennium Developmental Goals, set by the UN. So it's kind of like to reduce mortality, again, amongst like women, or reducing HIV rates. And they have something here called the Vision 2030. Perfect. E is for empathy or enterprise, N is for means, and T is for time or technical skills.
Any questions for our poet Laura? My apologies to the artists. I think I erroneously referred to you as the poets before. But any questions for the poets? And how did it go?
Yeah, like we all just had to agree on like what we thought P would be. So then that's when we kind of started finding other words.
I'm starting to think you might be the problem.
Yeah, probably.
Didn't you do it?
And our academics.
So we had the task of coming up with a concise definition of development. So we said it's a process of steady and gradual advancement, and it could be used in the context of society, institutions, personal economics. Development.
And in anticipation of the question, maybe you just want to address our outline?
Well, I think it took us a while to try to come up with a definition that would like encompass all of these different human aspects, but other than that, I think it went very well. Like to be steady, gradual, we kind of focused on that because
out of all groups, mostly out, but to be honest, it was a bit like a reality TV show over here.
What exactly was it?
It was going a lot slower. There was a lot of back and forth, a lot of parsing out words, and in some respects, I'm playing to what the point of the exercise is. One of the things that you'll find when you start talking about development is that it means different things to different people. And it's really easy to bring that all into a picture. It's really easy to bring that all into something poetic, where you can capture a lot. It's really tough to put that into something academic, where you're trying to come up with a definition. Now we're, I don't know, give or take 60 years into this little adventure of development, and we really haven't come to those definitions yet. That's normal, that's natural, and for those of you who've taken classes, you'll find that there's lots of competing philosophies, lots of different visions over time. Don't get frustrated with that, because it tends to be that they complement each other.
I think that was what was interesting about like people would be surprised. I was like quiet almost the entire time because I had so many different things like international development, community development, and even just when graduate school for community social development, it still wasn't. It's not like that question. You know, what is community development? It's the first thing they ask. So it's kind of like I don't know what it is. So that I mean, it's kind of interesting you said that point that we've been doing this 6 years and we don't know exactly.
And that's I've been playing this game for about 13 years now, and it's still something I'm coming to grips with. You getting that? You getting that?
No.
My shit. An ability to respond to unexpected events is sort of the measure of represented. I'm going to run. We'll talk about my service on Friday when we go through roles of volunteer development. I'll farm that a lot and give you different examples from my time as a volunteer. But one thing I want to touch on now, I was a natural resource management volunteer. My job, and the job of the 30 volunteers who swore in with me in the same sector, was to try and stem the tide of the Sahara Desert with nothing more than sticks, rocks, hope, and maybe a few trees. I worked really hard every day I was in my village. Over the course of the next 8 weeks, you'll come to think I was the worst volunteer ever, because I'll tell you everything I messed up. But I worked hard. My job, so I saw it, was to plant trees. My job was to break apart hard-pan soil, literally like this, so that things could grow in it. So every morning, I went about 1 kilometer from my village to where the farmland ended and where the desert began. Really where the no man's land in between the desert and the village. And I dug a hole. I dug a hole that big and that deep. And I was in better shape than I'd ever been in my life. And you can go to Google Earth today, and you can look at Bani Kube Niger, and you can still see west of the village 427 some holes about that deep that big, and then trees growing out of them. Now I'll ask you, was I a successful volunteer? The village is still there. The trees have grown. Desertification is a funny thing. It ends up being, right now in the Sahel, it's actually net zero. There's large parts of Mali, Sudan, Chad, where the desert's encroaching very quickly. But there's also large parts of Niger where they're reclaiming some. And if you try to look at it like holistically through satellite photos, it's actually, we're winning insofar as it's us versus the desert. But you, yeah.
Did you teach anyone? Did anyone help you?
Ooh, you're going to be really good at this, aren't you? I thought my job was to dig holes. I thought my job was to stem the tide of the desert. And I worked really hard, and it felt really good. And you can look at my village today, and you can see everywhere I did things. And you can see trees. But you know what would be really cool? If you could pan to the other side of the village and see trees. If you could pan down into the valley and see that it wasn't just me showing up planting trees for 2 years, but that I taught my villagers the value of planting trees. And that they started to plant trees. Unfortunately, you don't see 11-year-old trees, 10-year-old trees, 2-year-old trees, 1-year-old trees. You see a lot of 12-year-old trees that I planted myself. So I ask you, was I a successful volunteer?
I think.
Well, you
You don't know what
There's always room for improvement.
You guys are just too nice. No. I worked really hard. I can't believe you said no. Really? I worked really hard. I was really proud of what I did. I put together some great reports. Until my camera was stolen, we had some really cool photos. But I do not feel as though I was successful as a volunteer.
Whose idea was it to plant those trees? Yours? Or did you come together as a needs assessment to plant those trees too?
You could just head right to site if you're talking needs assessments, community buy-in. We'll talk a lot about that on Friday. No, I have an assignment from Peace Corps. Someone from Peace Corps was in my village for maybe 2 hours. Talk about that too. And they decided that they needed someone to plant trees. I planted trees. I worked really hard to learn language. I made a lot of good friends. I never talked to anyone. I never convinced anyone of the value of planting trees.
Yeah, I would say you were successful. But
Yeah.
you could have geometrically increased your success if you would have built capacity.
Yeah, agreed. I felt validated. I felt like a really good volunteer. It never occurred to me that satellite photos of my village would be available a few years later, and that I'd have the opportunity to see, even now, what happened. But you'll have similar opportunities. The world's changing in a way that you'll be able to know your community a decade after you're gone, as long as you care to communities. At any rate, that was basically a 5-minute soliloquy that summed up really nicely in this quote. If you're planning for a year, plant rice. So what does that mean? In terms of Peace Corps development philosophy, in terms of what we're talking about.
I mean, that's like a short-term needs and make sure that you have what you need for the next year.
And I've been doing this for a while. We can argue as to whether or not I'm good about it. But I'll tell you what, more often than not, you guys plant rice. Now, it's not to say you're going to go out to a patio and plant rice. One of you might. That'd be great. But you take short-term gains that feel really good, and then a year later, after you're gone, there's no profound difference. But you know what? It's really easy to go out and plant rice, and it feels really good. And you get a harvest after 71 to 90 days, assuming sufficient rain. If you're planning for a decade, plant trees. What does that mean? Ignoring eye contact. Sorry, Gary.
It's something that it takes longer to see the results of your work. You still will eventually get that gratification. It takes a bit longer. It takes longer for
I think it's like a different level of development. So you can, the trees will be there, but the trees can't teach anybody else to, build more trees. So it's kind of just a mid-level, but it still won't go farther than just that tree. And so I think it kind of just leads over into the next.
If this wasn't on tape, I'd steal that for next year's presentation. But, one thing to caution. You implied that the results would take longer and you may be able to see them. You might not. And that's really tough. I think one of the hardest things that you're going to experience throughout your service is, say, working with youth groups and never really seeing the successes that you've had. Because maybe you'll have 18 months with them. And maybe you'll stay in contact over the years, over the decades, and maybe you'll find out that they ultimately became, a minister. But you're just not going to necessarily know. But you'll always know that you're the one who planted that seed. So it's really, really easy to plant rice because you harvest. A little tougher to plant trees because you might not see the results. And then finally, if you're planning for a lifetime, educate people. What does that mean? What else?
Unlike a plant, a person like a voice and a person can teach others what they know and continue on that knowledge and make it better.
And also collaboration.
If you can all accept, sorry.
And also it's an environment that people that you be working in education with, if they have control over their own development and what direction they're going in, they can solve problems for themselves and probably be even more effective at solving their actual problems because they're more closely interacting with and can identify what needs to be addressed.
If you can all accept the irony, the Peace Corps development philosophy is best summarized by a Chinese proverb. I think we've got a really good example of what Peace Corps development philosophy is right here. We're focused on working with people and on capacity development. And at the end of this presentation, we'll go through that a little bit. And then on Friday, we'll go through it some more when we talk about roles of volunteer. It's going to be really easy and really tempting to plant rice, maybe even plant trees. But what we're really looking at is lifetime development and educating people.
Knowing this now that you have been out of volunteer, what do you think you thought when you were you thinking, like actively thinking long term, or were you just like, I'm going to try to get this done and see if it is long term, or like, what do you think?
Sure. Gosh, what did 23-year-old me think? I sums it up. I think I'd be a much better, stronger volunteer today. I think at the moment and probably most of the 200,000 volunteers that, I guess 180,000 at the time, that presumably thought the same way. I think we focus on short-term gains. I think it's natural. Like you'll be connected in ways that I didn't feel I was. I never had a site visit. We didn't have a project plan. I didn't communicate with other volunteers. It was PST and see you later. So I really felt a bit like I was making it up as I went. And I think it was natural that I would have gravitated towards like personal successes. I think you'll find the same things. And I wouldn't fault any of you for going that route. Ideally, you plant rice trees and educate people. Because these aren't conflicting visions. I mean, what happens if you only plant trees? Yeah, you're gonna starve. What happens if you only educate? With neither rice nor trees?
Nobody's doing anything.
I mean, you see the point. These aren't in conflict. They're complementary. Peace Corps has a niche, and they fill that niche really well. But we wouldn't be very effective doing it alone. If host country government weren't paving roads, if the World Bank or PEPFAR didn't have billions of dollars here on ARVs, I don't think we'd be very effective in our capacity building. Questions on this before we move on?
Just a comment on the education part of planning for things. I think it's more than that because what you're doing is not only your life, their life, but when you educate people, you're passing that on to future generations. So I think it's really long.
And having been in for a decade or longer, I can't tell you how many times we go out to a site visit. I say I'm from Peace Corps, and the principal just runs up to me and is like, "Oh my God, I was educated by a Peace Corps volunteer 30 years ago. I wouldn't be where I am today without it." That happens a lot. And you'll find that you'll have profound impacts on people that you encounter. It might be a passing moment for you. Maybe it's just someone at the clinic that you might never see again. But in 20, 30 years, they'll be coming up to another volunteer and they'll be asking, "Hey, did you know Joanna?" No pressure. I've got this. So each of these, oh good, the wind takes away from my lack of seconds. Each of those is a point in time on the history of development. We'll go through this relatively quickly, but I'm also, given how many of you raised your hands that you've had academic level classes on it, feel free to correct me, or feel free to provide some of the content. Anyone want to take a guess what that first dot is? Whatever you say, I'm going to tell you you're wrong.
Okay. Well, I was thinking about like missionaries coming over might have been one of the first, very earliest, whether people liked it or not, just parts of development.
I like that.
But it's wrong.
But it's wrong. Not as wrong as your shirt choice, though. But CJ does hit on a very important point. The history goes back a lot farther than we'll talk about here. As long as there's been interaction between cultures, there's been one culture implying that they're developing the other through the exchange of goods or ideas. For the purpose of this discussion, though, post-World War II, Marshall Plan. Who's got it?
Rebuilding Germany?
I'm sorry?
Rebuilding Germany and Japan.
Bigger. You're struggling. No, I shouldn't be giving you a hard time. I know you really want to raise your hand. You can do it. Come on.
Rebuilding Europe. Thank you.
Okay. Did everyone hear that? Marshall Plan was a really intelligent plan to rebuild Europe post-World War II. It worked phenomenally well, and it unfortunately became the blueprint for international development. Anyone want to take a stab at why I say unfortunately?
What works in Europe isn't going to work in every other country.
You nailed it. We'll go into a few more of the details. Maybe Jay's got it.
But also, you're talking about comparing Europe after war versus countries that aren't necessarily at war but have different issues, so you need to react differently.
You had a historically unique moment. You had a really educated population without any infrastructure because it was all destroyed. So the Marshall Plan was premised upon rebuilding Western Europe's infrastructure. It worked. It worked well. But extending that onward to developing countries that didn't have an educated populace, that didn't have homogeneous populations, that didn't have traditional ties between communities for trade, that didn't work as well. So Marshall Plan, post-World War II, was the first foray into this sort of international development. It was wildly successful, but it ultimately became a victim of its own success because it wasn't a model that could be replicated. Modernization was taking the Marshall Plan and extending it to other countries, other regions. Modernization was saying, wow, we had a huge impact in France just by rebuilding roads and airports. Let's go build roads and airports in Senegal. Did that work? Okay, you know it's on camera. Jay.
And a lot of countries borrow to be able to build that infrastructure. And some of it didn't hold up, and it didn't necessarily stimulate the economy in Europe or other countries that they were trying to become.
Here's where it gets nuanced. You're right, it didn't work. But we're better off for having tried. A lot of undertakings that came later wouldn't have even had the opportunity to really get started without those initial forays, without that initial infrastructure-driven approach. Now we've since learned that infrastructure isn't enough. But I'll tell you what. You try being a capacity-building Peace Corps volunteer in a rural village without any kind of road, without any kind of outlet to the wider world, and you're not going to be very effective. Like that infrastructure, that modernization philosophy, that had a value. It still does. And you'll see this theme repeated, it wasn't enough. So, you hit on this, no pressure. What happened as a result of the modernization model?
Countries in their early, countries when they were trying to go through the process of borrow money oftentimes to build that infrastructure. And so many countries owe money to International Monetary Fund, to the World Bank, and have become dependent on those paybacks, as well as expecting support or dependence in other countries to develop.
That's spot on, but it actually goes even deeper. What happens if you build a road without training on road maintenance? What happens if you build an airport without qualified flight control people? Jay.
You're going to crash the plane.
It created dependency upon the people who, countries who were providing that. And there was no, because of that, it was too difficult to maintain and expand that infrastructure.
There's a really big micro lesson therein that you will all fall afoul of at some point. Your first week at your site, someone from your clinic will say, hey, type this up for me. And you'll think, ooh, something to do. And you'll quickly type it. What do you think happens? Yep. And you know, it'll happen and you'll do it, and 2 months later you'll try to set up IT trainings to teach them how to type up their own papers. I'm getting some nods in the back. It's pretty common. It's very easy to unknowingly create a dependency. So good luck with that. So dependency led to world systems. Anyone have a feel for what world systems was? You'll recognize it by another name. Very good. Yeah, I'm starting to like that shirt more and more. These notes have an interesting little blip in them, saying that the 70s, 80s was really the start of globalization. I would say it needs to be more specific. It was the start of the latest round of globalization. Because historically you see, and this is going back thousands of years, you'll see maybe the globe was defined as the Mediterranean. But you'll see periods of globalization, and then you'll see people retreating back into their own kingdoms, countries, their own environments. 1890s was a huge wave of globalization. Steamships could ply the ocean in weeks. Telegraphs. People had never felt so connected.
I'd like to hit you on the spot,
But you are.
No, I'm not. Go with it.
Right.
So you talk about world systems, but I think you need to define for us to say telecommunication, banking, finance, not just trade, those kinds of
Thank you. World systems, latest round of globalization, was interconnection between economies. And that's at all levels, just as alluded to. That's not just trade, that's communications, that's everything. That's flow of people, ideas, everything. What do you think happens? If you're, sorry.
Identities get erased. Unique identities get erased. They just start to become one.
No, I've been abroad for a while, but I've seen The Matrix. You get countries slotted into trenches. This is sort of first world, second world, third world. This is, I think those are no longer the PC, politically correct terms, but that's when you have core, semi-core, periphery. And without an equal playing field, certain countries could have been taken advantage of during this period. The response to that was the basic needs approach. Anyone got a feel for this one? I would expect that.
Food, shelter, water.
Yeah, it was a little bit of, for lack of better words, it was a little bit of, hey, back off. It was the first time where the world really focused on the individual instead of on the country. It was exactly as you're alluding to. It was our role as the external party is to take care of these basic needs, and we'll let host country define their own macroeconomic needs. This was really the proliferation of NGOs. This was the period during which it all of a sudden became impossible to come to a common definition of development, because everyone was thinking something different. I don't think this was the period where lots of NGOs drew their own pictures to define development, but it could have been if they were thinking that way. So this basic needs approach was the first time that globally people were having a conversation of equals, where my role would have been to go into the community and ask them what they want. Prior to that, a lot of development was, for lack of better words, imposed by an external party. Now, over time, those external parties got a bit more savvy, but they remained external parties. And finally, the human development approach. This is the era we currently inhabit. And I think you can make some pretty salient arguments that we're entering a new era with all the interconnectedness and with all the transparency provided by things like cell phones and the internet. And I would love to have those conversations with you, but we're not going to do it right now. So the human development model builds on the basic needs model. And it talks about improvement in daily lives. The human development model focuses on the MDGs, Millennium Development Goals. It focuses on improving primary education, promoting gender equality, empowering women, reducing child mortality, improving maternal health, combating HIV/AIDS. And then on environmental sustainability and a global partnership. Sort of the feeling that we're all in this together. So before I transition, any questions on sort of this history of development? And I can't emphasize enough that one decade's philosophy doesn't contradict the prior decade's philosophy, they complement. We still have very important institutions that have a modernization model. And that's okay. They bring a lot to the table. We still have a lot of world systems out there. Interconnectedness, trade that might feel unequal. That's okay. It has value. So, for some reason, I just went on and on for 20 minutes with something that we can sum up in a few quick-hit sentences. Anyone want to take these? Don't forget, we'll be on camera. What was the philosophy of the 50s and 60s?
Do development to the people.
Thank you. You weren't just letting me just wither out there. No, I've treated wolves before. 60s, 70s. 70s and 80s? It's weird now. 80s and 90s? And 90s to present day.
Our people for development.
Read it again.
Yeah. This time with feeling. Come on, guys. All right, your homework is to write this 100 times. You know, I got into an argument a year ago with Kathy. Yep, about how for most young volunteers, JFK is the equivalent of William McKinley. Someone who might not be in a position to inspire them personally because he's been dead for about 50 years. And it is sort of a weird analogy. I never intended it to be. But look, William McKinley, he was a good president. He greatly expanded the U.S. by purchasing Alaska. He went to war with Cuba, echoes of the Cuban Missile Crisis, and he was assassinated sort of in his prime. Like, cut all this, because I got people back at headquarters that I know. But Peace Corps prides itself, and rightly so, on Kennedy's vision. But by the same token, as Kennedy becomes more remote of a historical figure, Peace Corps doesn't need to update its vision, because we'll talk about that. But it might want to update its marketing. Going back, Peace Corps comes onto the scene right around here. Going forward, given the short turnaround to get me up here today, in Gilbert's absence, we do not have a copy of the video. We will run the video on Friday. It's just a 3-4 minute clip where Kennedy explains his vision. One thing that is both really cool and profoundly impactful, Peace Corps' vision hasn't changed in over 50 years. Now you can see everyone else was talking about modernization. Everyone else was talking about huge swaths of infrastructure, billions of dollars. We, 50-some years ago, were talking about this, human development. So I don't want you to come away with the message like, hey, we got it right 50 years ago. The message is that Peace Corps' model has withstood lots of transitions in how development is perceived internationally. So that's a really strong model. Peace Corps' goals, the Peace Corps Act, it's sacrosanct for a reason. Because it's survived the test of time. it's gone through lots of opportunities to undermine it as development winds change. Yet it's nonetheless stayed the same. So, what is that novel? You'll see a lot on current approaches. Humanitarian aid, that's the wild cousin of development work. That's not us. That's showing up after a disaster, distributing food, medicine. That's not us. You'll see the infrastructure development. That's not us. We're small-scale economic development, and we're human development. And this is how we manifest that. Peace Corps' approach to development is to help people develop the capacity to use their own resources and skills to resolve their needs and improve their lives. So what does that mean? Anyone want to take a stab at how that would play out in your communities? How would you do this?
Connecting the people to the resources that are already available in their community.
I like that. We'll talk about that some more on Friday when we talk about roles of the volunteer. You'll be surprised how often people don't necessarily know the resources that are already there and need an outsider to help show them. Other ideas?
Since our time is, short here, and there are people that are here, live here constantly, bringing what we're trying to do and kind of ingrain that in the culture already, or into the culture, so it can continue on.
Thank you. Any other thoughts? It's okay. We're going to go into another level of detail. We'll talk next about the 7 key concepts in Peace Corps' approach. People to people. Process. Don't worry about this. There's a slide for each one. In fact, I'm not sure what this slide does. Bottom up, long term, it's participatory and inclusive, it's capacity building, and it's sustainable. So, we focus on people. We don't focus on things. You'll find through your service that you may do 1 or 2 small funded projects. You might be posted with an organization that, I don't know, runs a community garden. But for the most part, our focus is people. We are not a resource transfer organization. We don't show up, build a school, declare victory. We're very process-oriented. You'll learn about those processes during this training. You'll have a session week 4, week 5 on PACA. Don't worry about what the acronym means because I don't want to be put on the spot and get it wrong. But it's a participatory approach to community action. I'm asking you guys. But we find routinely that the people we work with will tell us, well, gosh, no one ever asked me. And that matters a lot to us. And you'll find maybe you're at a clinic, and maybe the nurse already knows what's going on, so consequently she never needs to ask her patients. what they need or what they want to know about. We ask the patients. We're bottom up. We work with people to help them define their own agenda. We do not tell them what they need. And that's going to be really tough. Because maybe you came here thinking you really want to do a training about basketball. And you really want everyone to understand a perfect jump shot. I gotta tell you, basketball's not popular here. So, that's not gonna work very well. Your first few months are all about helping to understand what the community needs. It's all about helping them to develop their own agenda so you know what they want. And again, as training goes on, we'll give you tools to help you do this. We strive to be long-term in our vision. We don't look for quick fixes, temporary solutions. We don't always succeed. Because again, it's a heck of a lot easier to type that one than it is to teach the other person how to type. It's a lot easier to run an antivirus program and fix the computer lab than it is to teach someone from the school how to do it themselves. You will find yourself struggling against this constantly. And all I can offer is sympathy and support. But this is tough. We're participatory and inclusive. Everyone has a voice, their voice matters, and we want them to own the process. We'll talk about this more when we do PACA, but you'll find that you might be the first people who've ever asked the